Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Over the last few months, two conflicts have gained a lot of attention, not just from the international community, but from the eye as well. One, of course, is Afghanistan and speculation about what's going to happen when the NATO forces complete their withdrawal over the next couple of weeks. The second, of course, Sahel. And again, what's going to happen as the French terminate their major Barkhane counter-terrorist operation. But in between the Sahel and Afghanistan, there's another conflict which has potentially been even more destructive than those two. That is in Syria, where to date, 10 years after the war began in March 2011, over 500,000 Syrians have died. 14 million have been displaced either within Syria or as refugees in other countries. That's 50% of the population. And although there has been a ceasefire now more or less in place for 15 months, it's a very fragile ceasefire. And we're not at the end of this particular conflict yet. We also know from those brave Syrians who have smuggled evidence of the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime out of the country or taken photographs of torture within Syrian prisons, that this has been a particularly brutal and savage conflict, notwithstanding the major humanitarian consequences in the region. For example, Turkey has had to play host to 3.8 Syrians, 20% of the population of Lebanon, a country in economic collapse, is made up of Syrians, and the fourth largest city in Jordan is a Syrian refugee camp. So this week, very usefully, the UN Special Envoy for Syria, Peterson, went to the Security Council and pressed the permanent members to now move on Syria, saying that the time is ripe. He called for the resumption of talks on drafting a new Syrian constitution. He called for a ceasefire. He called for an exchange of prisoners. And usefully too, in Rome yesterday, there was a meeting of 40 foreign ministers as part of the anti-ISIL coalition that also took up the case of Syria. The time may be right because Russia is now being somewhat more cooperative, particularly on Libya, working with Turkey and the UN on the removal of foreign troops and to organize elections in Libya at the end of the year. There was a summit between Biden and Putin, of course, recently to try to restore diplomatic action between them. And so maybe this is also a good time also to test Russia's willingness, Russia being, of course, the main backer of Assad over the years, to move forward. Now, we've been there before with Syria. In 2012 in Geneva, the UN sponsored talks for the first exercise in trying to draft a new constitution. We've had meetings in Paris, Istanbul, Rome, and Vienna as well. Over the years, we've had various groups come and go, like Friends of Syria, London 11, since 2016, the International Support Group. And Russia has launched the so-called Astana process with countries like Kazakhstan and Turkey in the region to try to bring about some kind of regional framework as well. So far, all to no avail. But Geert Peterson said that if the time is right, it's not just because there has been a comparative lull in the fighting, but also because this lull is fragile. We've seen just this week the United States organize airstrikes in Syria against the Iran-sponsored militias. Israel has been intervening regularly in southern Syria, again against Iranian-backed militias and Iranian weapons transfers. Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State in Rome yesterday, reminded us too that although ISIS has largely decamped to West Africa after the fall of the caliphate, the leadership, particularly the leader al-Qurayshi, is still very much in hiding in Syria, and there are 10,000 ISIS fighters still in Syria in Kurdish-run camps like Al-Hol. And Blinken again urged countries in Europe and beyond to take back their nationals before these foreign fighters escape and go off to join the jihad elsewhere. He praised Italy and Kazakhstan as rare examples of countries that are willing to do so. And even in the Idlib pocket between the Assad army and the Assad opponents, fighting goes up from time to time. For example, a hospital in Afrin was shelled just last week. So there's no complacency when it comes to the comparative lull we've experienced. The second reason for moving forward is the collapse of the Syrian economy, which could make the humanitarian situation even more dire. And in third place, as I mentioned, the great pressure on the neighboring countries to take in the refugees. They urgently need relief if they are going to be able to move forward. So what can we do? Well, there are two things that could hopefully build the confidence to start moving Syria out of its current morass. Number one, the UN Security Council is meeting at the moment to decide whether or not to reopen two crossing points from Syria into Turkey, Turkey into Syria, which were closed at Russian insistence last year. And these crossing points are vital to allow international relief organizations to bring food, medicine, and educational materials to 1.4 Syrians living in the north. The alternative is to give all of the supplies to Assad, and we cannot count on him, unfortunately, to distribute them fairly to his own people. So that would be a starting point. If Russia would agree, for example, to reopen the Al Yarabia and the Bab al Salam crossing points, as the United States and the EU has been insisting, so that we're not just dependent on the current Bal Hawa crossing point. The second thing which would be useful would be for all of us to refuse to recognize the fraudulent elections that Assad held last year to get himself re-elected in violation of a UN Security Council resolution, which says that those free and fair elections can only be held once a new constitution has been drafted, and then those elections must be free and fair under international supervision. And the third thing is to get the roundtable talks restarted on the drafting of the constitution. Do I believe that any of this is going to succeed? Probably not. But it's worth a try, and that's what diplomats are always paid to do, to exploit even the few opportunities that come their way. Thank you for watching and listening this week, and I look forward to engaging with you again, this time next week.